All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Deb Hodgson. If you have never met me before, I'm with New Hampshire for Safe Technology. And you may notice my shirt today, although it's out of season, it says grateful. And I'm grateful despite the fact we had some very sad news yesterday that Representative Abrami, for those of you who are not familiar with him, he was really the mover and shaker in all of what we've succeeded with in wireless in New Hampshire to date. So at the request of Cece, she wanted me to read the letter that I sent to Pat in honor of him. So please bear with me. Thank you, Pat, for being a rep who actually listened to me and took action. You truly have been a voice for me, a Stratham resident, and all the other Stratham residents who have no idea what you have achieved. You're so much more than a member of a political party. If that's the box people want to paint you in, they are mistaken. You will be sorely missed, as no other in the past 5 years was willing to do what you have done for me. Thank you for writing New Hampshire House Bill 522 in 2019, establishing a commission to investigate wireless. The New Hampshire Commission in its report has been relied upon by many states around the country and internationally. I thank you for continuing to include me every step of the way as I watched and witnessed you work on the commission throughout the pandemic, finding ways to make sure this commission met its deadline. You worked with anyone, regardless of party, and you are well respected by other reps as I witnessed them come to you across the aisle for you to sponsor a bill with them on educating the public on wireless safety after they learn the facts from your efforts. I thank you for your determination to find a way in which the state should support towns and municipalities in retaining their local control with regard to antenna placement. I watched you stand firm against members of your own party on this issue, as it is not a politically correct issue for anyone to take on, and you persevered. You were successful this fall in a 15-3 vote of the New Hampshire House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee with regard to New Hampshire House Bill 1644, the relative to placement of telecommunication antenna. They recognized and support that this is a serious issue that needs to be addressed by the state. On this issue, you've accomplished a great deal. You've teed up for new legislation to be supported by the Science, Tech, and Energy Committee this next session. It will remain to be seen who will carry that forward and represent this Stratham resident and all others who may be unaware of what you so quietly have accomplished for them. Thank you for daring greatly and standing in the arena on wireless technology safety for all of us. And I sent him the quote, the man in the arena, and thanked him for daring greatly. So I truly appreciate Pat Abrami. So today I am grateful. I'm grateful for him. I'm grateful for Jen and Lori, who are also part of New Hampshire for Safe Tech, who cannot be here today. For the Science and Tech Committee, for all the members of the New Hampshire Commission, and all the people near and far who have supported us to where we are today. And I am grateful you're all here today, and very grateful for Cece Doucette, who I will introduce next for those who are not familiar with her. Cece helped her children's schools become the first in the nation to take precautionary measures with wireless technology. She's the director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology and works with schools, communities, municipalities, and legislatures to address wireless radiation and public health. She's also the Education Services Director with the International Nonprofit Wireless Education, which offers affordable 30-minute online training for schools and families in corporate safety induction. Cece was honored to co-chair the technology panel for the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference at the National Institute of Health and to present state and local policy at the International EMF Medical Conference of 2021. She has been featured on the Genius of Wellness, Boston 25 News, PBS, EMF Warriors, in the EMF Summits with Lloyd Burrell, Josh Del Sol, and Patrick Vandenberg, and in the films Generation Zapped and Wireless Wi-Fi Refugees. Cece has been a tireless supporter. She has walked beside me, in front of me, and dragged me kicking and screaming through all the things that may have been uncomfortable for me, and I am grateful. Welcome, Cece.
Thank you so much, Deb. I am, like you, so very grateful to be with you on this journey. And I know that you didn't get a chance to talk about how sick you became from wireless technology and how you were the impetus in New Hampshire to first bring this issue to Representative Patrick Abrami. And I couldn't be any prouder to have you as my friend over these last few years, because you and Jen and Deb and the others who have been working so consistently are really, with Rep. Abrami and the Science, Tech, and Energy Committee, really moving the needle closer to safe technology. So from my heart to yours, mine's a little sore today too, to know that Pat Abrami did not get reelected this time. But I've come to learn that when a door closes, a window opens. So we're very excited to see, once he has a chance to catch his breath, what he might do next. So thank you to everybody with us today for tuning in and coming to learn and to bring your experiences and to ask questions. I'm going to do a screen share, and then following my presentation, we'll have time for questions and answers. Deb, can you give me a nod if you can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So my name is Cece Doucette. That MTPW just means I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University and a bachelor's in communication studies. And never in a million years did I imagine this is where I would be applying that skill set, but I'm so grateful that I have it. Mostly it's because I popped out of the womb into a family of 10 children. So we had to learn to communicate fast as a survival skill. So if anything I can share from my journey can help others to learn wireless risks and really just how to make a different choice to have amazing technology, but without the radiation. So as Deb mentioned, we became the first in the United States to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms with baby steps, right? Turn off the device when you're not using it. Turn the Wi-Fi on only when you need it, instead of all Wi-Fi all the time, which is what the industry would have us think is the right way to go. And always place the device on a solid surface, not your body. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we have this sign in our schools, but technically I don't think we're doing it. They are waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. So I had the privilege of serving alongside Massachusetts Senate President Karen Spilka. She's my senator for many years while we did fundraising for our local education foundation. And so I went to her office hours after I had figured out what wireless really is. And I showed her the science and I showed her Ashland's sign. And then I measured the exposures coming from her device and her district director's laptop. Both devices went right off the charts into high radiation levels. And she's looking at me like, really? And I said, yes. And nobody has any idea. And so she put me with an attorney in her office, and together we whittled out a bill that would form a commission to investigate this issue and then decide what to do. That was back in 2014. We introduced our first bill in 2015, and we have had legislation there. There was one even before that others had introduced on utility smart meters, which, as we'll see in a minute, are also high transmitters of radiation. But we've been on this ride for 10 years in Massachusetts, and we still have not taught the public to use technology safely. But there we have New Hampshire. When Deb introduced this issue to Representative Abrami, he went and did his research. He's an engineer, and all our engineers have been taught is you have to have heat from a device to have harm, which simply is not true. That thermal effect model has been debunked in the scientific literature thousands of times over. So we were so grateful when Deb introduced this issue to Representative Patrick Abrami. He did his deep dive and had a major wow moment, like, wow, what are we doing? And then he started drafting legislation. Deb introduced me to him. And the two of them hopped in his car and came down from New Hampshire to my home in Massachusetts. And we sat around my kitchen table for an afternoon, helping him to connect the dots. And then he wrote this amazing bill that in 7 months' time got passed into law in New Hampshire. It passed the House Committee on Science, Technology, and Energy. It passed the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services, and Governor Sununu signed it into law that they had 1 year to investigate this issue. And as we'll see in a minute, they completed their investigation and came out with a groundbreaking report. So we are so very grateful for all the hard work that's gone into our legislative efforts. And as Deb mentioned, I've had the privilege of connecting with world-leading scientists and doctors, and we have whittled this issue down into an online schools and families course that can be completed in about a half an hour right from your own computer. So we have mass training available. We can train an entire school district, an entire workforce in about a half an hour online. We are moving to a new platform, and we anticipate releasing that again very soon. So in the beginning, I thought I was the only one that had fallen down the rabbit hole here and figured out that all this wireless came to market with no safety testing, and it is extraordinarily harmful. And we'll walk you through the science in just a minute. And then 2 years into my research, I was invited to go to the Massachusetts State House, and that's where I met a whole room full of people who knew about this issue. And world-leading experts came to our State House to ask for right-to-know legislation. So many of us connected and founded Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And I love the partnership that we have with New Hampshire for Safe Technology, because we have already built a solid website that anybody can go to look at the state agency initiatives, to look at the science, to look at the events that we're hosting, to look at the news that's been covered in our Massachusetts papers. So there are so many resources that New Hampshire doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. We just partner, and folks can come here to be able to drill into the science and what other towns are doing. And then I like to share this link, and we will make my slides available to you through email for everybody who registered. And I was invited to co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference down at the National Institutes of Health. And this was the first time that we were talking about technology safety with government agencies, with hospitals, with doctors, with city planners, with architects, with urban designers. And it was news for almost everybody, but our talks were limited to 10 minutes. So if you want a highly credible, quick link to share with others when you open this conversation, this is an excellent one. And we had Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. When he retired, he said, well, what do we really know? Because he had been on the hardware end of things for most of it. What do we really know about wireless? And Mr. Clegg reached out to a dozen of the world's leading scientists and doctors and concluded we are not safe here in North America. So he has founded Canadians for Safe Technology, and he gave an excellent talk from the business perspective. We also had Theodora Scorado, who's the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, which is arguably the world's greatest repository and database and think tank on wireless radiation. And we also had Dr. Martin Pall, who's one of the world's leading scientists. P-A-L-L is Dr. Martin Pall. He walked us through like that, biologically, what this radiation is doing at the cellular level. And then we had Peter Sullivan, who's a philanthropist. He started his career as a military pilot, like Top Gun, a fighter pilot. So he was up there, you know, the further you get away from the Earth, the more of the Earth's gamma rays and stuff you're exposed to. So not only is he exposed to those in flight, but then all the radar that we've mounted on the planes, and wireless radiation came from radar. It's the same technology. And then all the instrumentation inside the plane. So Peter's health started to crash. He dropped a ton of weight. His teeth were getting brittle. And when his little boys, both of his sons, got into the preschool years, both were diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And what I learned in another lecture from Peter is that he figured out the wireless radiation, and he had done what most parents will do when they have a child on the autism spectrum, and that's to clean out all the toxic foods, go to a clean organic diet. And he went so far as to do the heavy metal detox as well on himself and his children. But today he will tell every family, remove the wireless, do a digital detox. And he shared with us that neither of his sons, who are now grown young men, neither one of his sons are on the autism spectrum anymore. And I had never even heard that that was a possibility. But apparently there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come from mom and it didn't come from dad. It came from somewhere in the environment. And time and again, when we speak to folks who work in this space, there's an entire profession called building biologists who go into a home and assess for all the air and water and man-made electrical currents. And they tell us all the time that they see so many beautiful inroads in families when they remove these toxic energies from the home. So lots of good resources in short snippets here. And then when I fell down the rabbit hole in 2013, we recognized that there were so many people being misdiagnosed. And now today, every single one of your doctors, your nurses, your town's first responders, your school therapists, your own therapists, anybody in the healthcare profession can now be professionally trained for 24.5 continuing medical education credits. And the conference organizer, Elizabeth Kelly, also got the certification for nurses for their CEs. So the EMF Medical Conference was done in 2021, but because of the pandemic, we had to pivot and go online. And so now the entire conference, all the lectures, all the panel discussions are available online for training at your own pace until July. And they've made it available, the general public can license the conference for just $39. And for the healthcare practitioners, they can get 24.5 credits for less than $100. So we just want to reach as many as we can, as soon as we can, because people are getting misdiagnosed and are still suffering. So that's my background and how I got involved in all of this. So what caused my schools to be the first in the nation to even have our little sign, hanging in our classrooms? I honestly think it was when they read the fine print. So anybody with us today who has an iPhone, I invite you to take that out right now and go into settings. And if you don't have an iPhone, that's okay. You can just look up your make and model of whatever device you own and look up the RF exposure. So radio frequency exposure. So See the Fine Print is a website that was put up by the Environmental Health Trust that shows a lot of the common fine print disclaimers, like who knew? In the iPads, it has said, watch out for seizures, blackouts, eye strain. What parent in their right mind would give an active device to a child if they knew there was neurological damage potential? So we'll show you the solutions too, but in your iPhone, from settings, scroll down and hit general. On a really old phone, you'd hit about, but most people have been talked into updating their phones. So from general, go down to legal and regulatory, and you can remember how to get back there. Remember the acronym GAL, like this gal at our webinar today taught you this. From legal and regulatory, about 4 down, hit RF exposure. So what we're talking about today is called by a few different names. RF means radio frequency, man-made microwave radiation. Sometimes it's called EMF or electromagnetic fields, because those are the pulsations of these microwaves that are coming at us day and night unless we learn to control them. So this legal fine print tells us 2 critically important points. One, it was tested at a distance from the body. And 2, they suggest you use a hands-free option like a speakerphone or a headset. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment to show you, you don't want to be putting those earbuds on your brain. That's just a really bad idea once we know it's microwave radiation pulsing into your brain. But there's a solution for everything, you guys. So don't be terribly intimidated, because we can help you step through all the lessons we've learned and teach you how to, like, skip jail and get your $200 and go right up for the good stuff. So this is something called a hollow tube headset. Sometimes it's called an air tube headset, but notice that it's just rubber and plastic, no metal. You don't want to be putting metal up to your brain, right? I saw one that looked like a really cool one, but it had magnets at the headset, so you could hang them around your neck when you're not using them, but you don't want to be putting a magnet up here because it will draw in the electric and magnetic radiation that's surrounding you. So you can get a hollow tube or an air tube headset. There are a bunch of companies out there that sell them. And you get good acoustics. These little ferrite beads break the radiation traveling on the metal that's in this wire that would be hooked into your device, right? So set it as far away from yourself as you can, because distance is important. You don't want to kid yourself. There's no safe level of man-made radiation in the scientific literature. But for short periods of time, if you have to use a transmitting device, go ahead and create as much distance and use a hollow tube headset. So I had a really tough time getting my head around this invisible toxin. Today we're all pretty aware from the pandemic that we need to be really on top of invisible toxins. But I was like, well, if wireless radiation is invisible, how do we even know? Then I learned there are radio frequency broadband detection meters. And this is one that was recommended at the medical conference. It's called the Safe and Sound Pro 2 broadband RF meter, the Safe and Sound Pro 2. So there are now actually doctors who are loaning this out in their medical practices. And I know a chiropractor here in Massachusetts who did this. She gives it to her patients for $10 and says, you've got 2 hours, go home and measure, and then come back and let's talk about remediation. So in my home, after I stopped circling my tail, I decided that I love my family and I'm not going to fry them any longer. So I have taken measures, and I'll share those with you on what I did, but notice I'm in the green here. The unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically in 3 feet of air, how much radiation is in there? In the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less in our indoor environments. So right now, knowing what I know, taking the steps that one by one, I did my baby steps and got to a safe living environment, I'm at 5.2 microwatts per square meter. So that's pretty cool, right? But I want to show you what most of us are exposed to today. I keep my cell phone in airplane mode as a rule. And remember how that legal fine print said to use a hands-free option? That's because they give us these devices with a bunch of different antennas, constantly pulsating microwave radiation in these spiked erratic pulses going, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? In the megahertz range at millions of cycles per second, in the gigahertz range at billions of cycles in 1 second, they're going, right? So we're like jackhammering ourselves with microwave radiation. So we have a cellular and a data antenna, a Bluetooth antenna, a Wi-Fi antenna, a locator antenna, a hotspot antenna. And for anybody who hadn't gotten word and got talked into upgrading to the new fancy 5G phone, don't do it if you haven't already, because there are even more antennas in those devices. So here in my home, we're at 5.2 microwatts per square meter. And now I'm going to take my phone out of airplane mode and give you a demonstration of what happens with this microwave radiation. So I'm not even doing anything. I hope I'm not blowing the sound out on our video. Okay, we're going right back into sugar. We're going right back into airplane mode, and you'll see it dissipates And then it drops me back into my safe and sound green area. But let me tell you what we just did. We went from 5.2 to 2.5 million microwatts per square meter. 2.5 million. And we want to be at just plain old 10. Okay. So lots of room for improvement in most of our homes, but I'm going to go back and continue with the presentation and go back to my screen share and give you some encouragement. So, you know, being that one of 10 kids, we had to figure things out for ourselves a lot. So my brain just goes right to solutions, right? Okay, here's the problem. Let's do our gap analysis. Let's measure, see what the problem looks like, and now let's fix it, right? So I went after a grant in my town. I used to be the grant coordinator for our public school district, and I knew we had a pot of money that people can apply for grants. So I went after a grant. I said, okay, it's invisible. Let's get a meter for our schools. Let's get a meter for our library so the entire town can borrow it and go out and do their gap analysis. Well, it took me 3 rounds because the first time I did my application, our board of select person said, oh, gee, we don't really understand this. Come back next time. Round 2, they're like, gee, it's probably more of a board of health issue. Well, I had already talked to our local board of health agent, and he was around in the 90s when the industry was pushing cell towers in, and he had said, yeah, they wined us and dined us. They took us to fancy hotels for dinner and said, here's this great new technology. And by the way, if anybody has any issue with it, sorry, the law says you can't sue us for environmental harm. Well, who do we think wrote that law? The wireless industry. But he knew enough back then about the cell towers. But when I asked him about wireless, it turns out there is no regulation around the personal choices that we make in our homes and our schools and our offices. We are free to choose safe technology. So it took me 3 rounds. I realized that I would have to go personally educate every single member of my select board. I met in their offices, they met in my home, I met in restaurants, coffee shops, and one by one, I taught them what the science is warning us about. And we became the first in the nation to put one of these acoustimeters on loan in our public library. And then after that first medical conference in 2019, that's when the first one was held, I met a doctor out in California at the conference who was right down the street from me in Newton, Massachusetts. And we went after a state level grant, and we got a meter put on loan in her public library. And then out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Verizon has put a cell tower on top of a neighborhood that made the children and adults so sick that people had to abandon their homes and the pollinators disappear. Pittsfield now has one on loan in their library. So this is something that any of us might be able to do a little legwork in our community and get a tool to make this invisible toxin visible and audible. So we're very grateful that our board of trustees at the library voted 4-1 to put this on loan as an information point in our community. So lots that we can do, you guys. If this is the first time you're learning about wireless radiation, it is incredibly overwhelming. But we know how to connect the dots for you quickly so we can get down to the nuts and bolts, right? So our local cable stations are wonderful. They're like the last bastion of independent reporting left in our world, I think, today, because mainstream media is owned by the corporate entities that keep promoting toxic products. So you turn on your radio and your TV and you hear Wi-Fi, 5G, you know, like it's the best thing in the whole world, but it's not. But that's the only messaging most people get. So I was so grateful that our local cable station came to my home and we did a 23-minute public service announcement walking through and showing really common exposures that most of us have in our houses today that we would never guess could be making us sick, or that might bring us to a tipping point. We could be feeling fine today, but this damage to our cells is cumulative with exposure. So someone feeling great today could hit that tipping point and be very sick tomorrow. So this walkthrough has been very helpful. I think it's gotten like 10,000 views. And maybe it could help people in your life too. So what does the science tell us? First, we'll look at the long-term effects, and then on the next slide, we'll look at the short-term effects. So for the longest time, the industry would spin any good study and say, oh, that's just one study, more science is needed, right? Well, here in our country, in the United States, our world-leading toxics research organization is called the National Toxicology Program, and it's part of the United States National Institutes of Health and Environmental Health Sciences. They spent 20 years trying to see if cell phones could be harmful, because when they started 20 years ago, that was the technology of the day, right? So at the end of the day, after an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health, they concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they can assign. That should have triggered public policy. And right on the heels of our big study showing this is carcinogenic and that it damages DNA, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another major large study on cell towers that corroborated all of the toxic findings that we found here in the United States. So we don't need more science. We need public policy and information to the public. So DNA damage is well documented through many studies, and that, as we know, is the roadmap to grow a proper anything from a fetus to a child to an adult to a pollinator or a bird or a plant or a tree. And this radiation is damaging DNA across the board. It was the infertility studies that really got me on my feet when I started reading the science. And I'll tell you what I found. They've taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating. It caused DNA damage. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable, or what's called apoptosis, in just 4 hours of exposure to this man-made microwave radiation. And that was the day I went, you got to be freaking kidding me. And that was when I found my voice and started speaking to my schools and looking around my house, as we had just sent my oldest daughter up to St. Michael's College with her MacBook that she was, of course, using on her reproductive organs. And our youngest daughter, we had just given a laptop as she went into high school, and she too was using it right on top of her reproductive organs. So there are additional infertility studies about pregnant women using wireless technology and having higher miscarriage rates. And then neurotoxicity. My goodness, what have we done to our world? In just the last couple of decades, look at the rates of attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism, Alzheimer's. We know scientifically that this constant bombardment of microwave radiation permeates or opens up the blood-brain barrier, which is a membrane that is meant to keep toxins out of sensitive areas like the brain when the blood is escorting toxins out of the body after normal cell repair. So we know how this is happening now, and we know that it is a key player. Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OBGYN program at Yale Medical, and Dr. Taylor has done the rodent studies exposing the pregnant mice to radiofrequency wireless radiation. And when those pups are born, they come out bouncing off the walls of their cages, resembling the lack of attention that a child with ADD or ADHD or an adult has. Here in Massachusetts, at Massachusetts General Hospital, we have Dr. Martha Herbert, who founded the autism lab there, and she sees huge connections between what she sees in the families in her care and what we know happens when we expose children to microwave radiation. And then Dr. Martin Paul just came out this year with another review paper which collects all the studies pertinent to a particular topic and synthesizes them and reports out the findings. He just came out with a paper this year on earlier and earlier onset Alzheimer's, where, like cancer, it used to take 25 years to show up. Alzheimer's used to affect people in their 70s and their 80s. Now we're seeing it in our 60s, our 50s, our 40s, our 30s, and in some rare cases, we are having diagnosis of Alzheimer's of 20-year-olds. So this is extraordinarily serious. And we are very grateful when more mainstream groups begin to look at this issue and then decide to do something, like the Environmental Working Group has done. And they have come out with some really important fact sheets of late. They did one on children's exposure to wireless radiation, calling for limits 200 times below what our government and industry are pushing out to the public. They have also just come out recently with a fact sheet on neurotoxicity that's really good. And this could be a good conversation opener. I know I found out about the Environmental Working Group as a mom when I stumbled across their Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen fact sheets about pesticides. Which ones should you really be trying to get organic? Which ones might you be able to still eat that are grown commercially? So we're so very, very grateful that EWG is now taking this on. And I want to note that children are especially vulnerable because their systems are still physiologically under development. And as Dr. Om Gandhi's diagram here shows us, when you put a cell phone up to the ear of an adult, this little yellow dot is on this head turned sideways. So if you put a cell phone up to an adult's brain, you'll see it is penetrating into our brain about a third of the way. On a 10-year-old child, it's penetrating about 3/4 of the way, microwave radiation pulsating into this child's brain. And on a 5-year-old, if you put an active phone up to a 5-year-old's head, you can see it is permeating almost the entire brain of that child. So these are not toys. Wireless should never be given to a child in transmission mode. Put it in airplane mode, download whatever your apps are, put it on your devices, whether it's a tablet or a phone, and then turn off all the antennas before considering handing a child an electronic device. So those are long-term effects. When we talk about the short-term effects, a lot of people recognize these symptoms, but would never know to connect the dots that it could be from their microwave transmissions from their cell phone, their tablet, their Roku, their Chromecast, their Alexa, their Ring, their wearables, all these personal devices that we've been talked into having for a cool factor and a convenience factor are causing electromagnetic illnesses. And we should note that the Americans with Disabilities Act, as far back as 2002, with great thanks to Elizabeth Kelly, who organized that medical conference, she also worked with the ADA back in 2002 to get them to recognize electromagnetic sensitivities. So insomnia is one that many people are grappling with today. And we know scientifically now why wireless radiation can be a key contributor. So in the wee hours of darkness, as part of our circadian rhythm, which is operated by light, natural light, in the wee hours of darkness, our brain would typically release melatonin from the pineal gland. Melatonin would go in and regulate the sleep cycle and help to escort those toxins from the body from normal cell repair and regeneration. But what happens is if we are surrounding ourselves with these spiked erratic pulsations of microwave radiation that is a man-made light energy form, the brain thinks the lights are on. So it's not just the blue light from your screen, it's the actual microwave radiation. The brain thinks the lights are on, and it doesn't release the melatonin properly, which then sets us up for failure with sleep regulation and cleanup of our bodies. So insomnia is a big one, but it's such an easy one to fix. Just turn this stuff off at night. You can still use your cell phone as an alarm clock. You can still take advantage of any entertainment you've put on your device and then turn off the antennas and enjoy it to your heart's content. Stabbing, searing, headaches, migraines, nosebleeds, ear bleeds. My own daughter had a migraine in high school. What kid should be getting a migraine? And she was getting the nosebleeds. Once we cleaned up our environment at home, those all went away unless she let herself get dehydrated. Chronic fatigue, pain from unidentified sources that our doctors can't figure out, skin, heating, flushing, rashes, tingling, heartbeats that are going too fast or too slow, depending on your own biological makeup, cognitive impairment where you can't remember what you were supposed to be doing, anger and behavior issues. It was really disturbing at the EMF medical conference to hear more than one of the presenters say that if we do not clean up our electropollution and we keep bombarding our brains with microwave transmissions, we shouldn't be surprised when we see more and more public outbursts like we've seen with the mass shootings. We are biologically changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain with microwave radiation transmissions. In fact, out in Santa Barbara, California, after the industry had put a cell tower in front of a fire station, these guys live in that station 24/7. They went to respond to an emergency in the community they had serviced for decades, and they couldn't remember how to properly gear up. They couldn't remember where they were going. And when they finally got there, they couldn't remember how to administer emergency protocols. Dr. Gunnar Hauser is one of the presenters in the EMF medical conference, and he did the functional MRIs on their brains and found that it had indeed changed the gray matter of the brain. And in 2004, the International Association of Firefighters put out a position statement that is still on their website today saying, until this can be proven safe, we do not support the installation of cell towers on our fire stations. But as we see in far too many organizations, we have reason to believe that there was conflict of interest at the top of the house with the International Association of Firefighters, who may have been seduced by industry and given really expensive equipment in exchange for letting them put their toxic cell towers on fire stations today. So we know biologically, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, even among kids like we have never seen before. And it's not just you and I, it's every single living cell on the planet. There's a lot of good resources to talk to us about what it's doing to dysregulate the magnetite and other apparatus that our pollinators and our birds have to keep them in sync with the Earth's electromagnetic field for navigation purposes. When we put in this ginormous layer of electrosmog, we now know scientifically that that's dysregulating their navigation systems. And in some cases, it's outright killing them from being directly microwaved. So when we have colony collapse and the bees can't find their way back to the hive, we know scientifically that this is a major player. For those concerned with climate change, it's important to know that in 2012, a Greenpeace analyst said, if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And that was a decade ago. And look what we've introduced since then. The layer upon layer upon layer of more microwave radiation. The atrocities that happen to get the many, many different kinds of minerals that power up all of our devices. We would never just toss aside a perfectly good device because we're being pushed into buying the shinier new object if we understood the cost to human and environmental contributors that get us these devices. So there's a lot we can do. We can learn not to stream, download your information, put it in airplane mode, and then enjoy your content. Every time we send and receive on a wireless device, every time we charge and recharge, and all those applications that we got talked into that we probably aren't even using, they are in the background continuously using energy to do updates. So all these little tiny things we can learn to do that will have a big impact in the end. So one of the missing puzzle pieces for me was, if this is as bad as the science is telling us it is, Why don't we know? In 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics put out this incredible report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. You know, I was just a good doobie going along, raising my family, working hard. I wasn't all that tuned into politics, but when I read Captured Agency and saw that the FCC and the FDA and other agencies, some of which had long ago done excellent research on this area, they were all defunded when the Telecom Act was passed in 1996. So when our government finished up this $30 million study finding clear evidence of harm, that should have triggered the FDA, which commissioned that study, to build public policy to protect you and I and our planet and our children and our pets and everything else. So why didn't that happen? Well, when you look into the background of the gentleman who heads up the FDA today, we see that Dr. Jeffrey Shuren is married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents, guess who? The wireless industry. All the big tech, big Wi-Fi, big, all of them. And so we have massive conflicts of interest, even as high as the World Health Organization. If you go and do a quick search on the WHO and wireless, you will find old documents that say, nothing to look at here. How would you even know to keep looking when they've given you these false assurances? Who would know that they have reopened their investigation of radio frequency fields? And they expect to report out on cancers, on impact on children, on impact on the environment, on electromagnetic illnesses, infertility, and more in the next couple of years. But the question remains, we know there's two groups at the WHO. One is heavily funded by industry. The other are the actually qualified scientists and doctors who in 2011 helped the World Health Organization determine that this is a group 2B possible human carcinogen in the same category as lead and thalidomide and a whole host of other chemicals that I can't even pronounce. That's where radio frequency has been since 2011. Now, because of these animal studies that we've completed with the National Toxicology Program and the Ramazzini Institute, the scientists are now saying we know enough today to reclassify this as a group 1 known human carcinogen. But there's corruption at every level. So that's why we're not waiting. That's why we're doing these education sessions twice a month to teach you to use your own common sense and then take measures to protect yourself. So how do we do that? Guys, it's so easy. It's not rocket science. The hardest part is the mind shift, because we've all been convinced by industry that this is really cool to have wireless and it's really convenient. Cool and convenient is not worth the trade-off for your health and mine and everybody around us that we're radiating with our devices. So here's what you do. Go flip your router around and you'll see that there are Ethernet ports in it, right? All you need to do is get a big long Ethernet cable and run it to wherever you use most of your technology. Most of us today have more than one device in our home. So who knew you can get this little Ethernet switch? And again, this is not going to break the bank for most of us. It'll certainly save on healthcare costs. But this is one that I've purchased. It's got 5 holes in it, 5 ports. So I just connect my router with one cable into a hole here. And then I just get short Ethernet cables for each of my devices and plug them into their own little hole here. And then who knew? There's like a little $30 adapter you can get for that iPhone. And here's what it looks like. Not scary, not intimidating. You plug it into your device and you can get other ones for the tablets and the laptops and stuff. Just make sure, you go online and find one that they say is compatible with your particular device. So step 1 is just simple and inexpensive hardwiring. And you can forward your cell phone calls to your landline when you're not on the go. A lot of people got talked into giving up their landlines. I use mine all the time. That's how people ring me. So it's just personal choices, right? So first, hardwire everything, and then it doesn't automatically disable all of the antennas. You have to go hunt them down and turn them off. So I did, and I figured out, to go into settings and go into each one of those cellular data, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, locator, and hotspot, make sure they're all turned off. And then once I had hardwired our laptops and stuff, I was looking at my router and I measured, and it was just blasting off the charts. And I went, uh-oh, how do I do that one? So I just called up. At the time I had Verizon, and they said, that's easy, sit down at your computer. And I went, really? Just sit down at my computer? And they said, yeah, and we'll walk you through how to get into your, internet service provider account. And then they just showed me the Wi-Fi settings. And there was a 2.4 gigahertz antenna in that box. There was a 5 gigahertz antenna. And later, when we switched to Comcast, because they offered a better deal to my husband, there was also a 2.5 hotspot and a 5 gigahertz hotspot. And so when we transferred to Comcast, so with Verizon, when back then they only had 2 in there, and I could just turn them off from my computer, off. I hit apply. It says, you're cutting off everyone's Wi-Fi. And I'm like, yes, thank you. And then I measured, and literally radio silence, right? But then when we switched to Comcast, somebody had tipped me off that they were using our home and our energy that we're paying for to throw signal out to the curb so their customers can drive by and keep a connection. And I don't think that should even be legal, let alone ethical. So that's where I discovered that there was these additional hotspot antennas in there. So when my husband said he was going to switch to Comcast because it was going to be a better deal, he asked them, can you be sure when you're done switching things out that there'll be no radio frequencies? And they said, no problem. So the installer comes into our home. He spends half a day switching out the boxes and stuff. And I said, okay, humor me. And I take my meter down to the basement where our utility closet is. And I turn it on, and it goes off the charts into the red zone again. And I said, you turned off the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz antennas, right? And he said, yeah. I said, and I understand you guys you're putting hotspots on our personal routers. And I said, did you turn off those? And he said, I did. And I said, so why is it still blowing up my meter? He said, I don't know. So he's fishing around down there. He calls his tech support. They don't know. He calls his supervisor. He doesn't know. So he said he's going to come back the next day with a supervisor. And I had remembered when I was at that medical conference having lunch one day, I was overhearing a conversation with some other people at my table, and Peter Sullivan was talking about a 5th antenna in there. So I reached out to Peter that night and I said, Peter, what was it? He said, oh, now they're putting another antenna in there for a home security system for wireless. Even if you don't have it or don't want it, they just turn all these things on and just leave them as the default. And I went, okay, I'm not playing that game. So my husband was gracious to run down to the electronics store, and he just bought our own router that we can control. So it cost a couple $100, but if you look at your phone bill or your internet bill, you're paying a monthly rental fee for their router. So it pays for itself over time if you buy your own. So the guys come back the next day, and I told them what I had learned. And I said, as a show of good faith, would you just be so kind as to install our router now? And they did. They were very nice, and I got to teach them something. But then a couple months ago, our stove was on its last leg. So my husband bought a new range, and it showed up with wireless settings. And I went, uh-oh. And I went into the settings, and there was no way for me to disable it. And I looked in the manual, and when I got to the RF meter or RF exposure portion of the manual for our new stove, it says stay 20 centimeters away from this antenna. And I'm like, what the heck? How am I supposed to cook standing in the middle of my kitchen, right? That's like 7 or 8 inches. And I went, you got to be kidding me. And so I called up the vendor and I said, I need a put in a request for service. And the technician shows up and he goes, what is it that we're doing? And I pull out my meter and I say, normally this meter's under 10. Right now it's 1,090,000 because of this stove. And he's like, I don't need to know that. And so he doesn't know what to do. So he calls his tech support and they tell him what to do. So they pull off the back of the stove, and behind the digital display, there's a motherboard. Next to the motherboard is this other teeny tiny little board with the RF antenna in it. He just went and unplugged it, and the radiation dissipated completely. So I mention that because the industry's push today is for 5G and the Internet of Things. And so they want to sell you every electronic product with a radio frequency antenna or multiple in them so that they can harvest your data and sell that as a revenue stream. So be very careful with everything that you buy today. They've even got this outrageous little clip you can put on your baby's diaper that will tell you if your child has soiled itself. So you will radiate your child and get a notice on your cell phone if it's time to change the baby's diaper. I mean, come on, what have we done to parenting? Pick up that child and do the sniff test like we all did. And why aren't you there with your child to know if they've soiled themselves, right? I mean, yeah. So message is not no technology, it's safe technology, and this is how to do it within the items that are under our own control. So the other items that may not be under our control include utility smart meters. When I was a little girl playing hide and seek, I would hide in the bushes and keep myself busy watching the little dials go around on our utility meters. Today, they're one by one getting systematically replaced. The analog meters were good, safe meters that measured our usage of gas, water, electric, now solar, propane. Those analog ones were perfectly safe. They lasted for 40 or 50 years. And then we got talked into digital meters and smart meters. So what you can do is go out and look on all your meters, do a little scavenger hunt. And if you've got an FCC ID, that is capable of transmitting microwave radiation to send information either to a drive-by person in a truck who's going to scan your house when they go by and get your usage reading. Or if it's a smart system, it will pick up your data. Let's say this is your home here. It'll pick up your data, use wireless transmissions to go to the next house and pick up their data. So now you've got more radiation coming because you've got more data being transmitted, and down it goes. And then somebody is unfortunate to be at the collection point, and they've got a massive amount of radiation going from their home off to the companies who can now sell your data. There's also concern about terrorism, where they could shut down these wireless systems without any notice to us, and hackers and thieves who can intercept your data going by, know your usage patterns, know when you're home, know when you're not home, back up their truck and steal your toys. But our main concern today, although privacy and data security is really important, we're really concerned about this, not telling people that this could very well be what is giving them anxiety, depression, insomnia, cognitive impairment, behavior issues, learning disabilities. I measured the 2 electric meters on my home for electric and solar, and they pulsed 17,000 times a day. So these things are very toxic, and there are other considerations here that you can look at later. It's a huge environmental justice issue. They come into these impoverished communities and say, hey, look, it was successful here when we rolled it out. Now we're going to roll it out across your state. And oh, hey, New York and Rhode Island, look how well we did in Massachusetts. So now we're going to roll it out in your state too. That's exactly what National Grid did here in Massachusetts. But at the medical conference, they were telling us that when these meters go in, it's one of the leading causes of sudden onset microwave sickness, as are the utilities, the 5G small cell antennas and big cell towers when they put them at close range. So lots of good resources here. The cell towers, as I mentioned, have been encroaching further and closer, they used to be 300 feet in an industrial park. Now, if we don't have protective zoning in our very own towns, they're putting them on buildings, they're putting them on rooftops, they're installing them right in the public access way, and it's unconscionable. So we know the science to share, but we need to be sure to look at the non-industry funded science. And, being a tech writer, when I started learning about this, I got completely overwhelmed. And then I couldn't remember how to get back to the important information. So as a tech writer, I just started collecting it and categorizing it. So this is my personal research repository called Understanding EMFs, or electromagnetic fields. And you are more than welcome to come look at that. You can also go out to antennasearch.com and punch in any address in the United States, and it will give you a 3-mile radius of how many cell towers and how many antennas are located within 3 miles of your address there. And it's unbelievable that at our State House on Beacon Street in Boston, at the time I did this, it couldn't give me a 3-mile radius because there were too many. It gave me a 1-mile radius. And in downtown Boston, 70 cell towers and more than 1,000 of these giant antennas pulsating microwave radiation 24/7. And the science tells us that we should be at least 500 meters from these, which is 1,640 feet. That's where the death curve starts coming down in the epidemiological studies. Starts coming down. It doesn't actually catch up to the general population till double that at like 3,000 feet. So all of our zoning code needs to be updated if we haven't done it yet to make sure we put these protections in place. And there's no cavalry coming. We have to do this legwork. Now, on top of those big cell antennas, look what we've got today. 5th generation or 5G cell towers. The industry is selling us this in our towns and our legislators, saying we can have faster entertainment downloads. And mind you, they are buying the entertainment industry for all this streaming that they're promoting. Smart cities, super highways. But here's what it really means. They're not getting rid of all the big waves that we have today with 3G and 4G. All that's left to monetize are these tiny little millimeter waves. And so they're adding them as a new toxic load, because these little waves, while they can carry vast quantities of data, they can't go through stuff like buildings, like leaves, like rain or snow. So they've got to bundle it all together in hopes that the signal will reach your device. And we've seen in too many communities where they come in literally in the cover of dark and start lopping off the trees so they don't interfere with these close range cell towers that they are putting at the curb outside your house and mine every 2 to 12 houses, unless we have protective zoning in our bylaws to prohibit it in sensitive areas. And that's what that first bill in New Hampshire that worked on their commission report was trying to do, is to get these setbacks established. And here's the kicker. In a commerce hearing at DC, Senator Richard Blumenthal asked the industry point blank, how much money have you invested in non-industry funded study to make sure this is safe before it came to market? And both of these industry guys basically said, we don't know of any safety studies that have been done. And now we're putting cell towers right outside of bedrooms. And Computer World and others are already reporting that 5G is a bad joke. It doesn't even do the faster speeds over 4G that they're promising. And here we have it. In January of this year, Verizon boasted that they brought 5G to 100 million customers. And this is a map here of Boston. Every one of these dots is one of these small cell antennas right at the curb outside of homes, offices, on school properties. And there is some controversy about whether 5G is causing COVID, right? We know that people are talking about that. We don't know any scientific evidence on that, but what we do know is that our biological cells only have so much energy, and it's pretty well calibrated to do normal cell repair and regeneration. When you put all this close range microwave radiation, in addition to what we've been talked into inside of our own homes, that takes us down a court already. Our biological cells are really struggling to keep up. Then when you have a pandemic and a virus come in on top of that, we understand scientifically that our cells have greater difficulty in repairing and allowing us to function properly. So this paper by Dr. Beverly Rubik and Dr. Rob Brown shows evidence for a connection between COVID-19 exposure to radio frequency radiation from wireless communications, including 5G. We're not saying it caused the pandemic. We are saying that when you look at cities that have adopted 5G, they have higher death rates and higher COVID case rates. And in Wuhan, China, when they turned on their smart city, 2 weeks later, the pandemic hit, and then we had people literally dropping in the streets in Wuhan. So it's something to think about. Dr. Magda Havas recognizes that our governments, by and large, are not measuring the cumulative exposures. And so she was one of the co-chairs of the EMF Medical Conference. She's also a professor emeritus from Trent University in Canada and taught EMFs for 25 years. And she has a study now called Global EMF Monitoring Project. And anybody who would like to help and be a citizen scientist, she has a little clipboard protocol that you can go down your main street, take measurements using her protocol, and then enter them into her database. And I know Deb and I did Stratham, New Hampshire. We measured Concord. I've measured several cities in Massachusetts. When I went on vacation, I measured down in my sister's area in Georgia. And one by one, we're entering all this data into the database. So you can see, can you brag about your community? Brag stands for blackout, where it's, oh, baby, you better just get out of the way. Red is no good. A is for amber. G is for green. Can you brag about your community? And these are for outdoor exposure limits. There was a conference held in Salzburg that determined it, even if we could be outdoors under 1,000, we might still do okay if we have a clean environment to detox at night at home. So outdoors, we want to be under 1,000. And this is the meter that is recommended for this scientific project, the Safe and Sound Pro 2, which retails for $385, but God bless Rob Metzinger, who manufactures this at Safe Living Technologies. Anybody who signs on to be a citizen scientist is offered a discount, and I think I paid $308 for mine. So you can go to Global EMF.net, emf.net, and sign up, or just look around, see if it's something you want to do. But here's what some outdoor measurements are ringing in at today. So again, we want to be less than 1,000. One of the fire stations in New Hampshire was in the green at 417. Keene, New Hampshire, when we did these measurements, was over 7,000. And one of the state reps was in touch with me today because they have approved permits to put these antennas outside of people's homes in Keene, like right outside their bedroom. So Keene is not going to be in the yellow for much longer. Nashua is already in the red. Concord, and Deb and I did this during the pandemic where there weren't many people out. There was not much going by in the way of cars transmitting or people on the streets, but we were already in the red with low traffic. And then in her town of Stratham, where there's a massive cell tower right on the main drag, we were in the blackout area. And then look at the north end of Boston. This is where we have our amazing Italian restaurants and bakeries. It's a heavily trafficked tourist area. And see what looks to be like this lamppost over here? That's a cell tower right where you walk. That's a 5G small cell antenna. And they sweet talk our towns and like, oh, you know, it'll blend in with the environment. Look how beautiful it is. Our towns go, oh, okay. And you're giving us money to put it in, right? We get a kickback, right? So who wouldn't take that up? But what they did is they put in these pretty wrought iron looking things. And then as you walk down Hanover Street and you look left and right into the Off-roads, they just put up these really ugly gray monopoles right outside people's bedroom windows. So that's what 5G is, unless you have zoning code to protect you. So Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that when we finally get things right, it comes through 3 channels. One, the public learns and figures things out and then starts doing the legwork to fix it from the grassroots up, which is what we're hoping to inspire today. The courts rule and public policy is enacted. And I'll wrap up in the next couple of minutes, but I want to show you that lawsuits are happening all over the place. The FCC has already been sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of scientific evidence of harm. There's an active lawsuit right now for brain tumors. There's a petition with the FDA to declare an imminent hazard. And here in Massachusetts, we've become a couple of firsts. I mentioned that Pittsfield had that terrible cell tower put right on top of this neighborhood, and 20 children and adults got so sick that they've had to abandon their homes. They've been fighting this for 2 years, and they just want to go home. Thank goodness for Bobby Orsi, who's a nurse. She fought PCBs with General Electric a decade ago, and she is now the head of their board of health, and she knows the corporate playbook. God bless Bobby Orsi. She worked with her board, she interviewed scientists, she interviewed doctors, and they issued an emergency order for Verizon to cease and desist with that cell tower. And now this is going through the courts. At the Fay School in Massachusetts, for the first time in 2015, the courts recognized that, yeah, you don't have to have heat from a device to cause harm. It's doing so much damage at the non-thermal level. So good things are happening, but change happens slowly, and there's many other lawsuits you can dive into. And then, as we discussed, Rep. Abrami wrote this incredible bill that says, why does the insurance industry already put exclusions in their policy for this? They won't cover damages. So our towns, our schools are liable for damages. And then that fine print that we looked at, why is the FCC dropped the ball? Why is nobody looking at the cumulative impact? So this is the New Hampshire report. And, you know, bless Deb, she volunteered her time and took minutes. So everything that transpired is documented, as well as the science and their documentation of the conflicts of interest with industry and the federal agencies. And then they make 15 recommendations that every one of us in our town should be looking at to label everything, give people the right to know, teach the public, transition our schools and all of our public places to the right solution, which is hardwired fiber optics to and through the premises. Don't just run the fiber down the middle of the road and then start throwing up all these wireless small cell antennas on it. That's the wrong solution. Bring it right to the premises and then just pick up with Ethernet cables and adapters indoors. And then wherever you do need to have a cell tower, put it so far away that it's not going to hurt the public, but we should also transition away from that too and develop additional technologies that are biologically compatible. And there is some good work happening in that arena, but we shouldn't be frying our pollinators and our planet either. So Dr. Kent Chamberlain, whose photo is shown here, he was appointed to the New Hampshire Commission. He used to be the chairman at the University of New Hampshire, and he is now professor emeritus for their Department of Computer and Electrical Engineering. And he was a career man, 30 years. He published papers, he reviewed journal articles, highly credentialed, and he worked on EMFs the entire time. He had no idea there were biological effects, and now he's done a complete 180, and he's out there giving public talks to municipalities and others about these dangers that they identified in their commission work. So Rep. Abrami introduced the bill that just came up to be reviewed this year. It didn't get passed, but we made a really big milestone in that the House Science, Technology and Energy Committee voted 15-3 that yes, there is something here and we need to do something about it. And they want to see the public educated, and they want our municipalities to be given guidance on how to fix your zoning code so they can't put toxic infrastructure in at close range. So we've got excellent resources. Dr. Chamberlain did a 20-minute presentation saying we're not making this up. Scientifically, this is where we should have a minimum setback from any of this infrastructure. And then he shares his slides too, so you can get to the science. I mentioned Frank Clegg, the retired president of Microsoft Canada. He testified with us this year too. And he said something that I thought was so important, that wireless technology is no longer advanced technology. It has outlived its useful life as a main source of connectivity. We need fiber first to and through the premises. And all of our testimonies had to be like 3 minutes or less. So this is a short document that's very powerful to share to establish credibility on this issue. So we're very grateful. We are working right now on new legislation to introduce in January. But as you start this conversation with your towns, one of the points of disinformation that the industry gives to our towns is like, oh, just, sign off on this application. And they might say, yeah, but there are people in our community who are concerned about this. And they'll say, oh, it's just your community. Nobody else cares about this. Well, that simply is not true. You can go to Americans for Responsible Technology at this link, and you will see that there are already more than 150 groups all over the country working their tails off to protect their communities. And we've done a lot here in Massachusetts. And towns themselves are taking action. The city of Boston banded with others across the country to sue the FCC. And we didn't win those suits, but it shows that this awareness is growing. And Burlington, Massachusetts became the first to put a clause in their small cell policy that said, if we give you a permission on this application to install these small cells, we're going to require that you come back every single year for every single small cell and pay an independent consultant to recertify that this is still within FCC limits. Well, when Verizon was at that meeting, when this was ratified, they were like, well, we respectfully withdraw our 7 small cell applications, because they didn't want to set a precedent, because they want to install millions of these. And look at what that would cut into their bottom line if they had to pay to recertify everyone every year. So the industry comes in and tells our towns, it's the law, you have to let us do this. Well, the law does say we need to have communication capabilities, but there are so many things that you can take today to your town that are teed up and ready to just hand over. With great thanks to our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology, they have a zoning code that you can take today to start the conversation. And after I gave one of these presentations to a Hanscom area towns, it's a 4-town collaborative of select persons. 3 of these other towns and others started adopting what Burlington had already done. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But if nobody's getting on this, the industry, you can bet, is about to come in, if they haven't already, and submit applications to your town. So many great resources to share. And I love sharing this one. This was a grandmother in Easton, Connecticut, who figured out what 5G is. She went to her town, explained it very well. They investigated, and they put a moratorium on any 5G build out until it can be proven safe. And they just re-upped it this year. So Hawaii County put a ban on 5G. There are things happening all over the world that you don't hear about in mainstream media, but you can just go click through and go, yeah, look at this. I can help do that, right? Our schools, this just makes my brain go crazy. Silicon Valley executives are sending their children to schools with no technology, not wireless, not hardwired. They know full well a child's brain develops best through meaningful, trusted interactions with the adults, the parents, the teachers, their peers, and the natural environment. And yet they're forcing all this technology into our schools and neighborhoods. Nellie Bowles at the New York Times did a 3-part expose. One of the articles, Silicon Valley nannies are phone police for the kids. They're making their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children while they force it onto ours. But again, solutions at every turn our friends who did Americans for Responsible Tech. They've also done a Tech Safe Schools website. Reach out to them. They will send letters on your behalf to your schools explaining the biological, the legal risks, and then that there are tools right here to remediate and get to safe technology. So there is curriculum and professional development already available for you, and all these amazing resources that are here for you to open this conversation. And we're here to help too. We can be brought in to give talks and hold hands and step people through all this. Professional solutions, the medical conference. There's also Physicians for Safe Technology by physicians that others can go look at. And we have solutions for all the professions. So it's all here. And I hope we've teed it up in a way that you can start working on your home. If you're not a do-it-yourselfer, there's an entire profession of certified building biologists who can be hired to help you do these assessments. And then this film is amazing to open the conversation. 74 minutes. Bring your loved ones, bring your neighbors, bring the parents of the kids your kids hang out with. Sit down and watch this film together. It was part of the United Nations Film Festival, and it's now available on Amazon Prime, and many of our libraries now offer streaming services so that you can watch it at home on your own TV. Who knew? PBS has already done a couple episodes on this. These are a half hour each. And then there's a whole toolkit at Americans for Responsible Technology that can help you to join a local group or give you guidance for starting your own group. And then they've got all these amazing resources that you can just click and print and take with you to go. A note about monkey see, monkey do. The children around us are watching. They know when we're not paying attention to them. They know when we've fallen into our phones and can't get out. So we need to be mindful of that. We need to set limits for ourselves and our children and model that good behavior. And then this is a great poster here to remind us what we used to do. We used to be out in nature. We used to be playing with the kids up the street, helping neighbors, writing, doing poetry, reading, hanging out in a hammock. All these beautiful things we can do, help a friend, instead of having our thumbs up our phones all the time. So this book, The Earth Prescription, talks about another field of science, which is called grounding or earthing. Simply put, there's a ton of science that shows that every living thing is meant to be connected with the Earth's electromagnetic field. We get electrons from the Earth that help to regulate our own biological systems. And we've stepped away from it when we went into rubber-soled shoes and rubber-sneakered cars and living off the ground. Just getting back out in nature can do so much for our health. And this is a really excellent book where in the Northeast, we can't be walking around barefoot for half the year, but she talks us through every season, Dr. Laura Conover, how to naturally ground without taking our shoes off. There's a lot of really great tips in there. So excellent resources. As I mentioned, so much we can take to our towns today. Reinventing Wires is this, and it's available online. You can print it out for free. It talks not only about the health, but a dozen other reasons why getting talked into wireless was a bad, raw deal for our towns. We need to be bringing fiber optics to and through the premises for energy conservation, for sustainability, for data security and privacy, all of it. Reinventing Wires, the future of landlines and networks. And then we just need to reframe it to differentiate the public's priorities instead of what we've been pushed into by industry. And always measure, not against the FCC limits, because they never protected us from day one, but from the biological limits that we know. And they are out at Safe Living Technologies, where that meter is from, or at the Building Biology Institute, they've got all that. So what we should be aiming for is a principle that already exists with our Centers for Disease Control. It's called ALARA, to get to as low as reasonably achievable. They already have information on that website for ionizing radiation, which knocks the molecule off the atom, like X-rays, gamma rays, all of that we know to protect ourselves from. Now we need to apply the ALARA principle to non-ionizing man-made radio frequency pulsations. So create as much distance as you can, use it for as little amount of time as you can, and shield if you have to. And there are experts who can teach you about shielding. So don't be fooled into a false sense of security. There is no safe level of man-made radiation in the scientific literature. And Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who just retired from the top of the house at the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, says, yeah, there are captured agency, but there are still some really good scientists in our government. But before we'll see major shift at the federal level, it's got to boil up from the local and the state efforts. So please, everybody, there's no cavalry coming. It's you and I and doing what Deb did and talk to her legislature and what we've been doing. We need to just keep the facts coming. All right. So at the local level, technology is here to stay. Every town should be forming safe technology committees. We can make that suggestion. We should, as a first step, have an opt-out of those toxic smart meters and digital meters, and then start transitioning our towns to safe, fast, reliable, hardwired to and through the premises. And tell our attorneys, our local town attorneys, by and large, are in the dark. They've only heard from industry, so they think they're doing the right thing when indeed they're not. There are attorneys who used to work for industry, who figured out the harm, and now they've switched teams, and now they represent individuals and towns. So somebody like Andrew Campanelli can take a look. He can be hired to look at your zoning bylaws. I think he charges a flat fee of like $8,500, which is pretty short money for a town budget. And he can take it from top to bottom on how to protect you, starting with what you already have on the books in your town, fill the gaps, and come up with new zoning code that will offer protections under the law. Okay. So education is critical. We can be brought in. Think about where you are. What do you belong to? What groups? What professional organizations? They're always looking for speakers. So we can come in and educate. So start where you are. And for today, think about how you might reduce something today, right? Start noticing what is radiating. What have we invited into our spaces? Start with baby steps, because we know this is overwhelming. Maybe tonight you'll create a sleep sanctuary where you just shut everything off at night. Again, still use your cell phone as your alarm clock if you need to, but do it in airplane mode and make sure you got all those antennas. Don't charge things near your bed. That introduces another form of dirty electricity, man-made energy. Ethernet cables and adapters is where you want to go. And again, it's not rocket science. And use airplane mode as often as you can, and just train people around you while you're making these choices. And maybe you will save somebody else's life along the way. And just know the Environmental Health Trust has amazing 1 or 2 pagers that you can go out there and print and take to your doctor, take to your schools, take to your town, take to your office, take to your town leaders. We've got you at every turn, but we can't do all the legwork. We need everybody on the ground to really take this seriously. So you can reach New Hampshire for Safe Technology on their Facebook page here, or you can email them directly. You can reach me through my website here, or directly through email at ma4safetech@gmail.com, New Hampshire for Safe Technology @gmail.com. So I'm grateful that you've stayed with us this long. I will stop the screen share, and we would love to answer questions. Deb, have you seen anything in the chat that people are looking for answers to?
Yes, Virginia or Virginie, I'm not sure. She ended up having to leave.
Okay.
She did have a few questions, and the first one is will there be access to the training, like on demand?
Yes.
Okay.
Everybody who registers for our monthly webinars will be sent the video and my slides. And we also post those up to New Hampshire for Safe Technology's YouTube channel. And then I share that on my YouTube channel, which is Cecilia Doucette.
I'm not sure if she meant that or the wireless education training that you were talking about.
Oh,
I'm not sure. It didn't
okay.
say,
Tell me
so
the
how about you
question
answer
again?
both?
All right.
Will they have access to the training on demand?
Yes.
Okay,
When we get our, we're beta testing the new platform right now. Once we're through that, we'll send out an announcement that this is now available to mass train whatever groups or individuals, you know, one by one, people can go in and take the training too. And it kicks out a tip sheet at the end with handy little reminders.
her other question was on meters,
Mhm.
and I suggested the two that I know, and she did ask about the Coronet ED 88
Yeah.
T, right, and Sydney had responded to that as well, so I don't know what your thoughts are.
Okay, good. So yeah, I know a lot of people who have become electromagnetically ill and they like that little coronet meter. And it's small and it's about half the price, I think, as the next level up, which is the Safe and Sound Pro 2 and the Acoustimeter. But it works fine from what I've seen. For people who just need to know if they're being exposed, it will catch that. For people who need to have a little bit more sophistication, then you go up to the next level, like the Safe and Sound Pro 2 or the Acoustimeter. Okay, Sydney, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh, well, I just also put in the chat the links to the unit conversion charts. I use them all the time. It looks sort of like this. It's hard to see,
Mhm.
but so that and it's all the units. So if you have microwatts per meter squared versus dBMs,
Mhm.
versus milliwatts per centimeter squared, and people throw these terms around, and you
Yeah.
think, wait a minute, I have the Safe and Sound Pro. Where are the microwatts per meter squared? I don't know. So you just look it up, and then you can go right across and volts per meter. There are a
Mhm.
lot of meters that say volts per meter.
Mhm.
So it's very helpful. You go, okay, I know what that means. And
Yeah,
then also
excellent.
there's the second chart shows this little thing what the Council on Europe recommends. There's a little place there, so that kind of gives you a reference point. So anything
Excellent.
above is bad, anything below, you're kind of getting in the safer zone. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, Sydney, thank you so much. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. These measurements are taken using very different systems depending on where you are. And so, yeah, those conversion charts are really helpful. And I know that Dr. Cindy Russell also has those out on her website, which is Physicians for Safe Technology. And their URL is mdsafetech.org. Okay.
Those were the only two that were written in the chat, so if somebody has something they want to share or ask
Yeah.
a question, please feel free
Yeah,
to
raise your
unmute.
hand. Or if you have inroads that you've been making
Yeah.
or ideas that you want to share from where you are, we always love that part too. Okay. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so very much for your time today. We're grateful. We hope you'll be able to share this information far and wide. We are doing the next one on the 21st of November at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then once a month, we do more of a boots on the ground kind of meeting with Massachusetts for Safe Technology, that anybody around the world is welcome to join us to talk about what's going on, what's happening in real time. And that's going to be at noon on the 30th of November Eastern time here. So you can always find these things out on Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our events page. And we thank you for your time and let us know how we can help. And Deb, thank you again for co-hosting with us today.
Thanks for coming. Thank
All right,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.